Welcome to the Edison Ford Winter Estates Step into History Digital Edition. My name is Bailey. I'm one of the historians who work in the museum. All of the historians here give multiple presentations ranging from 20 to 45 minutes long related to Edison, Ford, or just the general history of the time period that they were living in. We then upload these longer versions of our digital edition Step into History presentations onto YouTube, and then you can watch it however many times as you'd like. So today's presentation is titled Beauty is Pain, a look back into the beauty standards of the 19th century. Now, the Victorian expectations of beauty are very different from modern expectations, so I don't recommend that anyone try these practices at home. You're soon going to see why. So here's an outline of our discussion. We're going to start with an introductory timeline, just so everyone's situated, we're all on the same page pertaining to the history. Then we're going to move on to the face, the mouth, the eyes, and also the skin when we're talking about the face. After that, we'll be going on to the hair, then etiquette, fashion, and media influence. Now, I won't be covering the ideal weight for the Victorian era because no one here wants to be shamed for not being 90 pounds. I'll just leave it at the fact that it was very popular to look as if you had tuberculosis. Back in the day, it was called consumptive fashion. So that is not a healthy look at all, and I don't recommend that you do that. So here's the timeline. I'll walk you through it. It starts with Thomas Edison's birth in 1847. And then 16 years later, Henry Ford was born. 2 years after Ford's birth, we get Mina Miller, Thomas Edison's second wife. So you can see there is a little bit of an age difference between them. And then comes Clara Bryant, Henry Ford's wife, just 1 year after Mina's birth. And then in 1869, we get the publishing of the Laws of Health in relation to the human form. Now, I do have a copy of it right here. You can get it on Amazon for about $10 to $15. It's a good beach read. You can read it through all in one sitting. It was a very popular book back then. It gave an extremely detailed rundown on the general beauty standards for white upper-class Americans during the Victorian era, which the Edisons and Fords both were, and how to achieve those looks. Now, 2 years after the publishing of that book, Thomas Edison marries his first wife, Mary Stillwell. She unfortunately passed away when she was only 28 years old, back in 1884. Trying to get away from the stress of being a father of 3 kids and being the famous wizard of Menlo Park, Thomas Edison escaped to Fort Myers with his second wife, Mina Miller Edison, in 1885. So first, we'll be starting with the face. On the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of Queen Victoria, painted by Franz Xavier Winterhalter. This was painted in 1842. You can see that she's not wearing too much makeup or rouge. She has watery, puffy eyes. This is because back then in the Victorian era, having a pale complexion symbolized purity and nobility. So many upper and middle class Americans and English women would wear face powder made out of zinc oxide, which sounds scary, but it's actually fine. It's actually what makes you look a little pasty when you put on sunscreen. Or they would use lightly colored cornstarch, which nowadays we use for cooking, and it's not recommended that we put on our face because it causes breakouts and inflammation. Now, many upper-class women use makeup products containing lead, oblivious to the potential health hazards. These products were thought to enhance beauty, but they often did more harm than good, which is what we're going to be hearing a lot in this presentation today. Then, light pink powder would be dusted over the face powder to act as a blush. These would mainly be made out of vegetable dyes and were quite cheap. It was also the trend of the time for girls and young ladies to pinch their cheeks to have a natural glow on their cheeks instead of applying those pink powders. It's believed that Queen Victoria herself started that trend. She was very influential for her time. She was a bit of a trendsetter. She also started the trend of wearing white wedding dresses. She wasn't the first one to wear a white wedding dress, but she was the one who popularized wearing those dresses. Now, for some reason, if you didn't want to cover yourself with those lovely ingredients, there were natural remedies to make your complexion pale and clear. Our book suggests washing the face twice daily with powdered borax, pure glycerin, and camphor water so that the face is both cleansed and freed from its greasy appearance. In order to whiten the skin, we should use fresh lemon juice, rainwater, and otto of roses. Now, otto of roses is rose oil, which is essentially an essential oil. And you would do that several times a day. This would obviously agitate the skin and once again do more harm than good. If all else fails, just lay thin slices of fresh meat, preferably veal, on your cheeks overnight, and it would cause a slimmer and paler complexion. Now, over on the bottom left-hand side, you can also see that there are something called arsenic complexion wafers. Now, these are apparently, according to the box, guaranteed absolutely safe and harmless to anybody, which is why we're all consuming them today. You would buy them over at the pharmacy, and they were seen as completely safe for consumption. Now, if you didn't want to go through the work of putting that makeup on yourself, you could visit a beauty parlor and get a face enamel. Enameling was simply painting the face. The skin would be prepared using an alkaline wash, and the artist would fill in any wrinkles or depressions in the skin with a yielding paste. So Anne asks, what was that book again that is being referenced? That's a really good question, Anne. So it is titled Personal Beauty, and then it is written, sorry about it being fuzzy like this, but it is written by Brinton and Nafis. It's got a pink colored book, but if you just type into personal beauty onto eBay or Amazon, you'll be able to find it. So back to the face enameling. So yep, your face would be filled in, any wrinkles or depressions would be filled in with a yielding paste, and then thin blue lines were sometimes added to mimic superficial blood vessels, thereby giving the skin the appearance of translucency. He really wanted to look as pale as possible. And then they would apply the colors of the skin, first a ghostly pale white and then a light red. And that could stay on for anywhere between 2 and 3 years, depending on how long you washed your face. And I know it sounds very tempting. Unfortunately, the main ingredient for these enamels was, you guessed it, lead. So once again, not recommended. Now, when you come to the museum and you first walk inside, you'll see a colorized photo that shows Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and their wives, Mina and Clara. Now, I personally believe that the color of the rouge is highly inaccurate. Here's what proper ladies would think of women with heavy blush at the time, because the blush in that photo is very, very dark. It says that they associate only with the bedaubed creatures who pace the pavements at night, with Jezebels who paint themselves, and with actresses who stand before the footlights reddened up to the eyes. So not the best impression. As for the eyebrows, I'm just going to change the slide. There we go. Our book says that the eyebrow must be moderately thick, especially at the inner third, with the outer third tapering to a point. Now, when it comes to the arch or the lack thereof, advice does tend to vary from source to source. Some beauty books of the area advocated a straight, level brow, whereas others stated that the natural arch of the brow should be accentuated. Now, as we can see from all three photos, slightly darkened eyebrows were in vogue during the Victorian era, as having light blonde-colored eyebrows was seen as defective, a little hurtful, and some women used the following ingredients to make an eyebrow dye. You would use walnut bark, steeped for a week in eau de cologne. It gives a dye that is transient, but can be easily applied every day with a camel hair brush, which you can still get at art stores like Michael's and Joann Fabrics today. It takes an instant effect and cannot possibly do any harm. Or they would use the water in which potatoes have been boiled in their skins as a dye. And then many people watching this presentation are very familiar how lip gloss and having a glossy sheen on your lips is in fashion and sometimes falls out of fashion and then inevitably comes back in. Well, it was also trendy during the Victorian times to add petroleum jelly to the eyebrows to add a nice glossy sheen. Now, I'm assuming that many people watching this have also woken up and had gunk in the inner corners of their eyes, sometimes called eye boogers. Well, that was seen as positively unsightly in the Victorian era. In order to counteract this, you would apply the following concoction to your eyes every morning. You would use lard, but make sure it's free of salt because the salt could agitate your eyes. And then you would add chemically pure glycerin and then the red oxide of mercury. And then you would apply that to the inner corner of your eyes, and it would get rid of any gunk in your eyes, as well as probably some pieces of your eyelid. Now, mascara as we know it today did not exist in its modern form during this period. If you wanted to darken your eyelashes, which was highly recommended for blondes and redheads who had lighter colored lashes, here's how you do it. You take frankincense and gum mastic, which is a tree resin, and then you mix it and drop it over red hot charcoals. Then you receive the fumes in a large funnel and a black powder will start to adhere along the sides. You then mix this with fresh juice of elderberries and apply with a fine camel hairbrush. Then something revolutionized mascara. It was the patenting of petroleum jelly, namely Vaseline, in 1872. After that, mascara was commonly a mixture of Vaseline and coal dust, which is the recipe that Queen Victoria herself used. Now, our book, unfortunately, was not very nice about those who wore glasses. We were known as curious freaks of fashion. In order to avoid having to wear eyeglasses, there were a couple of different ways to fix our vision, allegedly. The first remedy was taking a handful of fresh red hot peppers and pouring them over a half pint of pure alcohol. Then you would wipe twice daily on the brow bone region above the eye. Now, if that for some reason that doesn't work, you would dunk your face into salty water and then open your eyes when you're submerged and kind of wiggle your face around until you get all of the impurities out of your eyes. Doing that twice daily should do the trick. I haven't tried it, but I don't recommend it. Now, when it came to the lips, having full and plump lips were desirable, while thin, narrow lips were generally not very in fashion. The Victorian era also saw the rise of the Cupid's bow trend, where the double curve of the upper lip was enhanced via lip balms and stains. Just as with the face, having balanced and evenly shaped lips was considered beautiful. In fact, the Victorians highly prized a symmetrical body. Our book recommends that we sleep on both sides or rotate regularly at night, or else we run the risk of displacing our internal organs and subjecting them to unequal pressure. In turn, that will mess up our walking gait and make us look positively unseemly. In order to add extra hue to the lips, natural tints were the most common. Natural rosy hues that created a healthy, flushed look were considered attractive. Red lips were starting to gain popularity at this time, and there was a gradual deepening of color as time went on. For example, lighter, natural red tones were popular in the early Victorian period, and then deeper, more intense reds were preferred in the later Victorian era. Now, these looks were achieved by using natural fruit or flower stains made of beetroot, strawberries, or rose petals to create a rosy hue. There were also lip balms made from beeswax or almond oil that helped smooth and soften the lips. Furthermore, lip paint was also used by mixing carmine. Now, for those who don't know what carmine is, it's a red dye that is obtained from the crushed shells of insects. And then you would mix it with various plant-based ingredients. Even now, widely known companies like MAC and Maybelline still use carmine in their red lipsticks today, which is why I'm wearing pink lipstick today. Straight and white teeth were also considered the apex of beauty. In order to gain strong and straight teeth, our handy dandy book recommends that we use our teeth as much as possible. It made a point to say that we don't need to chew on hardtack, as the soldiers do, but to chew deliberately on whatever you're eating. It also goes on to say that deliberate chewing is a good appetite suppressant for those who are on a diet. Once again, I chose to omit specific diets because it's very depressing. Our book also advises to avoid anything sour or acidic as this wears away tooth enamel, so they were right on the nose with that one. However, they do kind of fall off the wagon by saying that clean cane sugar and maple sugar do no harm whatsoever. It also warns that snuff dipping is bad for the teeth, but tobacco as a whole, such as smoking, is a good alternative. Dental hygiene was a concern during this era, and tooth powders were used to keep the teeth clean and white. And you can also see from this photo, there is the rise of Colgate during this time, the antiseptic dental powder. For those who couldn't afford to buy Colgate or any name brand tooth powders at the time, you could make it from scratch at home. You would use precipitated chalk, powdered myrrh, powdered orris root, and powdered borax. Unfortunately, according to Poison Control, borax and other boron-containing compounds can be poisonous when eaten, inhaled, or applied to the skin. If you wanted to whiten the teeth quickly, you would mix some pumice stone into the mixture. What could go wrong? Toothbrushes during this time were not very popular. They were originally made of wood and pig bristles, so I can't blame anyone for really disliking them. Our book recommends a good alternative, which is the tooth sponge. These are fine sponges about the size of a large pigeon egg, mounted firmly on handles of ivory or wood. They're readily cleansed, carry a dentifrice more neatly than a brush, and seem to have no objectionable qualities, which is why we're still using them today. Moving on to the hair, the hallmark of Victorian beauty was having long, well-groomed hair. In order to achieve this look, women would use hair extensions and wigs and use a plethora of hairpins to create intricate hairstyles. Wigs for women were mainly used out of human hair, whereas wigs for gentlemen would be made out of horsehair in the 19th century. Less expensive options included wigs made of wool, which was easily dyed into different colors, and synthetic fiber made out of celluloid and other early plastics. Silk wigs were also used in the Victorian era because they created the appearance of fine, shiny hair and were easily made into frizzed wigs or curls. There was no one perfect hair color in the Victorian era, although many fashion plates of the time showed women with dark brown hair. Our book recommends finding a color that doesn't contrast too sharply with the skin, such as a pale person such as myself avoiding having black hair. They obviously didn't have L'Oreal back then, so they would often crush up walnut husks, boil them, and then apply them onto the hair. This created a brown hair dye and was used to darken light-colored hair. If someone with dark hair was starting to gray, an infusion of sage and rosemary was recommended to enhance the original darker color. Black tea was also used to emphasize or darken the hair, as well as to add some shine. And it's also recommended to cover up gray hair. Another recipe recommends saying 1 pint common wine, 2 drams of common salt, 4 drams of green copper, and then boil for some minutes. Then add oxide of copper, boil for 2 minutes, take off from the fire, and then add 4 drams of powdered walnuts. Rub the hair with this composition and some moments afterwards with a warmed linen cloth, then wash with common water and recycle the wine. I'm not too sure what they mean by recycle the wine, but I hope it's not drinking it. Yep, these were all, baldness was also common during this era because of the excessive use of heat and tightening curls too tightly. This wasn't mentioned in the personal beauty book at all. The main statement that they made about baldness was the belief that men go bald more often than women because they use their brains more. No shampoo was used during this time period. People used soap, lye, or eggs to clean their hair and washed on a weekly to monthly basis, depending on how oily the hair was. As for what is listed on the slide, in 1912, the Parliament of Commonwealth of Australia actually published a series of articles titled Secret Remedies, What They Cost and What They Contained, and one of the patents that they analyzed was Edward Harleen's hair restorer, and it said that the hair would be dried out, causing more damage than good, and to avoid that hair restorer. I'm going to move myself over once again. And I'm having some trouble clicking the slides. There we go. Moving on to the figure. Having and flaunting an hourglass figure was the embodiment of beauty during the Victorian era. Women achieved this shape primarily through the use of corsets, tightly laced garments that contoured to the bodies and created an exaggerated silhouette. Now, this was the least grotesque picture that I could find of what a corset does to the body. You can see that these are not without controversy. They came with a variety of maladies. When tightly laced, they could compress the rib cage and the diaphragm, which causes shortness of breath and fainting spells. The fun doesn't stop there, though, because the pressure that's applied to the corsets could push your internal organs out of their natural placement, which leads to digestive problems. Also, extended usage can weaken the back and the abdomen muscles, which causes muscle atrophy, and women who wore corsets were more prone to back pain and reduced core strength. Corsets were also contributing to skeletal deformities and reduced mobility, leading to skin irritation and sores caused by chafing. Regardless, they were worn to achieve an exaggerated silhouette of an hourglass. Now, luckily for us ladies, corseting gradually lost popularity and was all but finished by the time that the 1920s rolled around, and having a boyish body shape became the new quote-unquote trend. Now, back in the Victorian era, beauty and etiquette went hand in hand. Manners, posture, and behavior were integral to defining a lady's beauty. Women were expected to exhibit grace and refinement, both in their physical demeanor as well as their interactions with one another. Etiquette manuals served as guides for women at the time. The most widely circulated manuals were The Habits of Good Society and Our Deportment, or The Manners, Conduct, and Dress of the Most Refined Society, all of which are available to read online for free, either through Google Books or from Project Gutenberg. I'll just leave this slide up for a little bit if you want to write it down. And then all you have to do is Google the title of the book and then read afterwards. And then I'm also going to read off some examples of the expectations of women at the time. Number 1, wives should be in charge of all of the household finances. This is why Mina Edison didn't like the term housewife. She preferred to be known as a home executive. Don't show any emotions on your face, even when crying, because it causes premature aging. Our book puts it best when they say, serenity of disposition is the fountain of youth. Avoid being left-handed. Left-handed people are able to create an unpleasant sensation of awkwardness and clownishness in the minds of observers. People with weak eyes should avoid reading on trains. I couldn't find any information as to why not. And when crossing the pavement, a lady should raise her dress with the right hand a little about the ankle. To raise the dress with both hands is both vulgar and can only be excused when the mud is very deep. Now, if you'd like to know more about etiquette and propriety, we do offer etiquette classes here at the Estates. Just go on to EdisonFord.org, click on our calendar/events page, and scroll down until you see etiquette class. Now, these classes usually sell out far in advance, so I recommend that you make your reservations as soon as possible. And it looks like we have another question in the chat. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Anne. So we're going to move on to fashion next. The Victorian era, namely the 1870s and 1880s, is what I like to call the baby got back era. So you can check out the printout figure right here. During this time, the silhouette evolved into the bustle style, where there was a fitted bodice with the help of a corset and a pronounced bustle at the back. This is the bustle area right here. It created a distinctive shape at the rear of the skirt. Now, women accessorized by donning bonnets or small hats. Clara Ford allegedly loved hats and would always buy a new one whenever she visited Fort Myers. And gloves and fans were essential elements for a Victorian ladies' ensemble. They were often color coordinated with the dress. As for colors, having dark, rich colors were the most popular, and then stripes, checks, and floral patterns were commonly used for both men and women. The most popular fabrics were silks, satins, and velvets, and they were often adorned with lace, fringe, and decorative trims. Just like nowadays, what was considered in fashion changed at a rapid pace. For example, at the beginning of the 1870s, sleeves were generally tight-fitting, but by the mid-1870s, they began to widen into what's known as pagoda or trumpet sleeves, and then by the 1880s, this type of sleeve became fashionable. It's called the leg of mutton sleeve. We should bring it back. The media did play a pivotal role in shaping and perpetuating Victorian beauty ideals. Fashion magazines and literature disseminated images and stories that glorified these standards. The fashion illustrations of the time featured women adhering to the Victorian aesthetic, which influenced both how women saw themselves and how they were perceived by society. Beauty ideals were very much a product of the media's influence, just how it is today. Now, Godey's Ladies Book, Godey's Ladies Book, which was an American women's magazine, was published from 1830 to 1898 and was known for its fashion plates, illustrations, and articles on women's fashion. Interestingly, they also contained a lot of articles on domestic life, and some of the magazines that were published during the Civil War have recipes for those who are on Union food rations and Confederacy food rations, which I personally found very interesting. Overall, this was highly influential in promoting and disseminating the hot fashion trends of the Victorian era, as it was the most circulated fashion magazine in the antebellum United States. All issues are available online for free through the University of Pennsylvania, which I found to be fitting because it was initially published out of Philadelphia. Now, across the pond, the English Women's Domestic Magazine, published from 1852 to 1879, covered multiple aspects of the women's life, including fashion, sewing patterns, and even household management. It essentially served as a practical guide for homemaking. Moving on to literature, Charles Dickens' novels, most notably Great Expectations and Bleak House, also contained rich descriptions of Victorian dress of the time. These novels vividly portrayed the attire and social distinctions of the Victorian era, which in turn further reflected itself into society. This was before radio and television created famous actors and pop stars, so we need to keep in mind just how influential books could be during the Victorian era. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is another great example that provides descriptions of the protagonist's clothing and how it reflects her social status and character. For example, when Jane Eyre first meets Rochester, the story's Byronic hero, she's wearing a black merino coat, a black beaver bonnet, neither of them half fine enough for a lady's maid. So she sounds like a nice breath of fresh air. So as we've seen in some, Victorian beauty standards continue to influence contemporary beauty ideals in subtle yet enduring ways, not so much endearing in my opinion, my apologies. Values like modesty, refinement, and the pursuit of an idealized figure are still deeply ingrained in modern society's notions of beauty. Many current fashion and beauty trends draw inspiration from the Victorian era, such as wearing white wedding dresses, wearing heirloom jewelry, and having detailed embroidered blouses, which shows the lasting impact of this historical period on how we perceive beauty today. And so that does wrap up my digital discussion, excuse me. So here are my sources for those who are interested. The Smithsonian Institution played a very essential role. They have a great book called Fashion, The Definitive History of Costume and Style, which not only covered the Victorian era, but pretty much every era of history, it felt like. And then Sears catalogs also played a great role in seeing the everyday fashions. And so I want to say thank you for logging into my digital discussion today. If you have any questions, I'll just stay online for about a minute or so. Ooh, looks like there's someone in the chat. Oh, thank you, Christy, for saying great presentation. So thank you so much for coming out. I'll stay just for a couple of minutes, just in case you have any questions, but I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, thank you, Kathy. Let me see. Yeah. All right. And so I'm just gonna, what was your name, please? My name is Baylee Wolfendale. Thank you so much, Rita. All right, I'm gonna end this now. Enjoy the rest of your day. So let's stop share, and then I hit end. And